Woohoo!
So when we talk about our experience of time,
Yes.
we talk a lot about the past, the present, and the future. So let's talk about this from a feeling perspective. What's it like to be mentally in the past?
Well, mentally in the past, just like when you're like reminiscing on old memories, it's sort of like it's nostalgic. And it's sort of like you're missing something that you can never go back to. And you're like looking at yourself from however long ago, and you're knowing that like even if you went back there, like even if time travel existed, you wouldn't be the same person that you were today. And you're looking and you're thinking, how did I get from point A to point B? You know, like how did I get from the past, the present, to the future? And you're sort of thinking, I am now probably won't exist in the future in like the way that I am now. Like I will always exist, but I will change as a person. And it's like at a certain point, your past self becomes unrecognizable to you. So you're looking at the past and you're looking at your memories and you're thinking, I hardly remember that anymore. And you're thinking, I won't remember myself right now in the future. And it's all sort of like ties together, like past, present, future. And you're thinking, I am like a constant being. Like I existed so long ago and I exist now and I'll exist in the future too. But at the same time, I'm just constantly ever changing.
So obviously you can mentally be in the past.
Yeah.
Right? By remembering things, like you said. But there's not only the ability to put your mind in a different temporal plane, right? That is to put yourself in the past, the present, or the future. But you can actually have different, what we would call comportments towards that past.
What?
So most people, when they're experiencing the past mentally, it's not quite as abstract as you just talked about it. So let me throw out a couple of verbs that really maybe describe our experience of the past. So there is remembering.
Yeah.
There's regret. Right? Regret is an inherently past tense mode.
It's like, I should have done this or I shouldn't have done this.
Mortification. Right? Those moments where you wake up in the middle of the night, you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. Right?
Yeah.
That's a real feeling. That's a phenomenological feeling. And then, so that's one, those are negative comportments, right? Regret is negative.
Yeah.
Like from a, an emotional standpoint. But there's the opposite too. There's fondness. There's the experience of familiarity. Also a positive comportment.
Nostalgia.
Nostalgia, another great one. You can see when you get into the phenomenological realm that there's not only multiple time dimensions, but there's actually emotional components to those time components as well.
Yep.
So let's talk about that same sort of time movement in our minds about the future. What's it like to be mentally in the future?
It's a fantasy world. You're basically, you're like, I wonder what will happen. And then you sort of like build yourself upon what will happen. Like you're taking what you have in the past and what you have in the present, and maybe it's like other people's memories of what they were like when they were your age. And then you're sort of weaving it into this complex narrative where you believe your future could be like, and then that's often what you do at like a crossroads, what you do when you're trying to make a big decision. Okay, what will my future be like here? What will my future be like here? But then when you are thinking of the future, when you have the past isn't like real or tangible to you right now, but it is something that exists in your memory. Like you can go into your mind, you can go into the pictures, and you can think, this is real, this happened, this existed at some point. And with the present, you're existing right now. But in the future, you are logical about it sometimes, and sometimes you're not exactly logical at all. You can like take from your past and present and other people's past and presents, and you can make a future for yourself that you think is realistic and very probable and very possible, and sometimes it even turns out to be somewhat true. But when you are thinking of the future, you are thinking of a fantasy that you are creating for yourself, whether that be good or bad or something neither good nor bad. So there's nothing that real about it. Like the lines that you're following to get there, the paths that you think you'll continue to take, that is real, but you are following the path up to where you know it, which is the present, and then you're assuming where the path will continue to go. But it's impossible to predict because the path can go anywhere.
There are lots of variables, right? And of course, well, we'll get into this in a bit, but we often aren't being completely honest with ourselves as we look into the future.
Yeah.
Well, so what's a negative comportment towards futural thinking?
Anxiety, fear,
worry,
feeling apprehensive.
Sure, we worry all the time, right?
Yeah,
Human beings love that.
Love worrying.
Love worrying.
Love worrying.
What would be the positive expression of
Hope.
the future? Wow. Hope. Yeah, for sure. Another one, anticipation, right? Where you're excited about something and you're kind of... And I think there's also, by the way, it's not always just positive or negative. I think there's some neutral
There's a ton of
comportments.
Yeah.
So I think that analysis, right, and planning,
yeah,
those can be much more neutral in feelings.
Yeah. And there's a ton of like complex emotions too, where you feel like sort of like that, and that's gonna apply to anything, like past, future, like just any emotion at all. Where you're feeling happy or sad or like just like bittersweet. Like there's a ton of different emotions that you can feel at that, and not all of them correlate.
Well, and I think that they mix together, right? There can be anticipation simultaneously with worry.
Yeah.
Or they go back and forth really quickly.
Yeah. You can feel hopeful, but you can also feel really anxious.
Right. But when you get into the mental states, you begin to understand how complex for us time is.
Yeah.
Strangely enough, the past and the future are mental modes we spend a lot of time in as human beings.
Yeah.
And are somewhat easy to articulate for us. But talk to me about the present. Do you experience the present, or what does that feel like?
The present is just like existing. Like there's no amount of emotions you can associate with the present, because the present holds every emotion in it. Like it holds every experience, because there's no like internal feeling of the mind. There's no looking forward or looking back or looking at anywhere except where you are right now. And so this place where you are right now, this present, is the realist, like most tangible place you can be, because with the future it's entirely imaginary. In the past it has evidence of having existed, but it doesn't exist anymore. So the present is just who you are right now. It's just the act of existing.
Well, but the way you're describing it is almost from a physics perspective at that point, right? Or it's sort of like, what's it feel like? Or do you ever even experience the present?
Like, it feels like everything. Like, it feels like all your senses at once. It feels like this conversation that we're having right now. It feels like awareness of being in a place. Like, if you're really thinking about the present, it feels like awareness of your existence. Just like sort of the awareness of like who you were and who you might be, but also just like who you are right now. And you sort of know how temporary it is, because every present is every second. Because like when I started that sentence, it was seconds ago, and so now it's in the past, and now it doesn't exist anymore. So it's like the present is constantly moving and changing, and it never lets you stop for a second, because if you stop for a second, then suddenly you're in the past already.
You're always chasing it.
You're always chasing it. You're always running after the present. You're always existing in the present moment, and you're never existing in the future or the past, because the second you go to the future or the past, it becomes your present. It's so temporary, so that it feels like it almost doesn't exist at all. But it is, at the same time, every moment you have ever existed and every moment you ever will exist. Because although those are the past and the future now, at some point, they are the present. Because every past was once a present, and every future will be a present. And all those memories that you're looking back on, they were just you existing in the present. And this is the present, and this is memories now. And so it's like you're sort of aware of how everything can exist at once when you're really thinking about the present. You're sort of aware of like the time block thing because you are the present. Right now is the present, and right now is constantly changing.
Let's talk about a few more pedestrian ways that we might experience presence. So I think that one mode you might describe that is observation. Mm-hmm. Right? I think you could just simply be in observation, right? And let's talk about, I think, probably where we as humans spend a great deal of our time, or mental time, that is. And that is being lost in the moment. So in really, you can kind of think about that, just like imagine yourself just sitting there in front of the TikTok reel, right? It's almost like you don't exist. Right? It's not like you're thinking about the present or the past or the future or anything else. You're just literally experiencing.
Yeah. And I know you said TikTok as sort of like a funny haha, like, oh yeah, like look, or like we're getting consumed by the TikTok, we're getting so focused on the present that we can't possibly think about the past or the future. But like people are always telling you to focus on the present. Like focusing on the present, like when you're completely consumed by something, like when you're on the TikTok reel, then yeah, you're not thinking about anything but where you are right now. But like that's the same can be said for when you're like going out into the world and you're like looking at the view. Like just stop for a second and like smell the flowers. Like it's just the present time is just existing as you are without thinking about anything else but how you are experiencing the world. Like, you're not thinking about how you're experiencing the world. You are just experiencing. You're not thinking about it. You're just experiencing the world as it is. Yeah. And, like, if you would take that away, I guess like, you could definitely say something negative about, like, the TikTok reel. But there's so much that's beautiful in that.
Well, yeah, for sure. And I think a positive expression of that moment of lostness, modern psychology describes that as flow. Mm-hmm. Right? And that's when you're like, you're in the midst of a problem, right? Or you're solving something, and or in a game mode, and you're just like so absorbed into it. Like we love that as human beings. We love being lost in the flow.
Yeah.
I think that society is deeply suspicious of how we spend presence.
Yeah.
And the lack of experience we actually have of our present moment. One way that I always describe that, it was as a parent. And, when you have especially very young children, infants, you're always kind of mentally projecting into the future. You're like, oh man, I can't wait until they are no longer nursing. I can't wait until they're sleeping through the night. I can't wait until they are potty trained.
Not to brag, but I am potty trained.
Yeah, congratulations. No, it's been a great moment it was a great moment for me. I could describe it actually. I have a great story about that, but I will refrain from discussing that publicly at this point. But the point being, though, as parents, it's so easy to get locked into that futural mode of thinking. You can literally miss your entire child's life. So it's complicated. The present is surprisingly complicated. Mm-hmm.
Do you think you sort of fall into that trap where like you're like constantly looking to the future and you're not focused on the present?
I personally feel like modern humans, one of which I am, have a real hard time with presence. That is those moments of really kind of feeling like you're experiencing that presence in its fullness, because we have so many distractions. So, it's like when we went camping. There are moments there where you're just sitting in front of a waterfall or whatever, and you can kind of just you can just be. Mm-hmm. But if you have this thing in front of you, if you have that phone in front of you, if you have that TV or that video game or all the, things that we have available to us, it makes it extremely challenging to turn those things off and to be more present.
Yeah.
And so I think that I suffer from that. I think I spend a lot of time in mindlessness. I think I spend a lot of time in the future. I personally don't spend a lot of time in the past.
Mm-hmm.
I remember things. I find what I've learned important, but I'm not someone who sits in regret or, fondness or all that. I don't just spend a lot of time in the past. So I would say I spend most of my time in the future. But I will also say, and we'll just lead into this next thing then, that, when you were young, I spent several years practicing meditation. And that's an extremely powerful tool for human beings. And it allows you to be present in a way that we aren't very often. And we aren't with work. And it is special. And I think because it's so hard and so rare for modern human beings, it gets a little bit, I think that in meditative practices, it's a little bit overly privileged. Because I do think that futural thinking and past thinking are also valuable modes of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
But when you experience real presence, it is something special.
Yeah.
How about you?
Well, I don't think I spend too much time looking at the past. Like, there are, like, occasional moments when I, like, reminisce, or, like, I look at old photos or whatever, and then I remember, and I'm like, oh my gosh, wow. But, like, I really don't spend that much time thinking on what used to be. And I think I probably spend more time thinking on what could be. Like, I think I definitely consume myself in a lot of fantasies about, like, what the world could be like, or like, oh, what if I win the lottery tomorrow and then I have $2 billion. So, like, a lot of times those, like, future thoughts are like, they're, like, less concrete reasoning and logical thought and more fantasy. Like, they're more what I want there to be and less what there probably will be. But at the same time, every future thought is a fantasy in some way. So, I mean, like, there's actually not as big of a difference as you might think of, like, using reasoning to think yourself into the future and just thinking of the future however you want to. But in terms of the present, what you said before about being in the present versus being in the future versus being in the past versus being, like, in the present but, like, in a different way, I think that before you were talking to me about, like, my perception of the present, and I was describing it, and you're like, oh, okay, well, you're getting into physicists with it, like, you're getting to
Analytical or
analytical.
something. Yeah.
You're not really thinking about how the present is and how it feels like to be there. And I think that I could say the same to you as you're talking about the present, or as you were just talking about the present, in that you're talking about meditation, about sitting on a rock and looking at a waterfall, as if it is the most present you will ever be, as if being present in the present is somehow like an unachievable feat, and you are experiencing the present more than you are when you're just mindlessly scrolling. But I think that when you're looking into yourself, when you're, like, in meditation, when you're looking at a waterfall and you're thinking, wow, this moment is so beautiful, I love looking at waterfalls, you are less in the present than you are when you're mindless. Because when you are losing your train of thought, when you are just existing in the present without thinking of anything else, when you're mindlessly scrolling through your TikTok reel or your Reddit, or you're just like consumed with another task, whether that be for work or for fun or for something else entirely, you can call that negative or positive, you can call that whatever you want, and it certainly depends on the activity that you're doing at the time and whether you think you've wasted that time by the end of it. But that moment right there, when you're not thinking of existence or thinking about the temporality of being in a place, when you're not meditating or looking at a waterfall, that is the time when you are most present. That is the time when you are existing and just being a person without thinking of existence how it is. And I'm sure you got a lot out of meditation. I think a lot of people can get a lot out of meditation. I think it's good to consider the present in an abstract way every once in a while instead of just existing in it. I think that's a really cool thing to do. But there's no doubt in my mind that if we're considering who is more present in the moment compared to someone sitting on a rock in a waterfall and thinking about how special this moment is, or someone that's meditating, or someone that is just reading a book or doing a project or hanging out with friends or scrolling on their phone mindlessly for hours. The person that is most in the present is the person that is not thinking of the present. And whether that be good or bad, it is just a factor that is, because being in the present and just being in existence, that is what life is.
So I think that was all really well said. And once again, I think that, that's one of my slight issues with meditative practice, or people who privilege meditative practice, is that they tend to do that by discounting the mindless sense of presence.
Yeah.
And I think that you're right to say that there is no inherently better mode of existence. And just as I said, I don't think that the present should be privileged over the past or the future. I also don't think that the meditative presence should be privileged over the mindless presence. Having said that, though, your description of meditation was totally incorrect. I can tell you have not really meditated. You kind of gave the classic outsider's perspective of what meditation feels like. Mm-hmm. That you're sitting, looking at the waterfall and marveling at the amazingness of the waterfall in your moment and all that kind of stuff. You can do that. Like that's a mode of being. We've all done that occasionally. But I agree with you that is not particularly special. Whereas a meditative moment, I believe, actually is. And it's hard to describe. But I think that the way that I would describe it in 2 words maybe is, I think the way that I would describe it is, one way is stillness. You're not marveling in the moment. There's just a stillness in your mind. And there's a huge amount of receptiveness. It's like things begin to invade you rather than you controlling your mental thoughts. It's like it just is a still moment where worries could come in, but you don't worry about the worries. You just allow them to be and experience them. Regret could come in, and moments of the past could come in, but you don't control that. You don't obsess about it. You just sit there in stillness and experience and observe.
We hope that you enjoyed that video, and if you did, please consider checking out the next one in the series.
Or some of our other series on philosophy and life.
We upload videos every Friday, so don't forget to like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe. See you next week.